It's 1879, and a 16-year-old farm boy is walking down a dusty dirt road, leaving everything he's ever known behind. In his simple cloth bag are all his worldly possessions, and in his mind burns a single vision that will change the world forever. Cars don't exist yet. The fastest way to travel is by train or horse-drawn carriage. Most people will live and die within 20 miles of where they were born. But this young man, this restless dreamer fleeing his father's farm, will put the entire world on wheels. 35 years later, half of all automobiles on Earth will bear his name. He'll become one of the wealthiest men in American history, and the revolution he starts will transform not just how we move, but how we work, how we live, and how we see ourselves. This is the story of Henry Ford. But here's what makes this tale so incredible. Henry wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He wasn't a trained engineer or educated inventor. He was just a farm kid who hated farm life, dropped out of school in 8th grade, and had an obsession with taking things apart. The odds of success were stacked impossibly high against him. The automobile industry didn't even exist yet. The few experimental vehicles that did exist were expensive toys for the wealthy. Most people thought the idea of a horseless carriage was either a dangerous novelty or an outright joke. Yet somehow, this unlikely hero didn't just enter the automotive world. He completely reinvented it. He didn't just build cars, he created the modern assembly line, pioneered mass production, and essentially invented the middle class as we know it. He took a luxury item that only the rich could afford and made it accessible to the common man. In doing so, he didn't just change transportation, he changed everything. Let me take you back to where it all began. July 30th, 1863. Dearborn, Michigan. A farm owned by William Ford, an Irish immigrant who had fled the devastating potato famine. William had worked his way up from nothing, building a successful farming operation through sheer determination and backbreaking labor. The Ford family wasn't wealthy, but they were comfortable by the standards of rural Michigan. They had land, livestock, and steady income from their crops. Into this world came Henry Ford, the eldest of 6 children. From the moment he could walk, everyone assumed his future was written in stone. He would grow up, learn the family business, and eventually take over the farm when his father grew old. It was the natural order of things in rural America. Farms stayed in families for generations. Sons followed fathers into the same life of seasonal rhythms, early mornings, and connection to the land. But Henry Ford was different from his very first breath. While other farm children found comfort in the familiar routines of rural life, Henry felt trapped by them. The endless cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting felt like a prison sentence. The physical demands of farm work exhausted him, but not in a satisfying way. Instead of the pride that came from honest labor, Henry felt only frustration and longing for something he couldn't even name yet. His relationship with the fundamental elements of farm life bordered on the comical. He declared horses dangerous and ill-tempered creatures, refusing to work with them whenever possible. He found the idea of drinking milk absolutely repulsive. He considered chicken meat unfit for human consumption. Even the basic social structure of farm life felt wrong to him. While his siblings seemed content with the predictable routines, Henry craved complexity, challenge, and most of all, mechanical precision. The breaking point in Henry's relationship with farm life came during his daily chores. About an hour into each day's work, he would inevitably announce that he needed to return to the house for water. His father would nod, expecting him back shortly, but Henry would disappear entirely, and they'd eventually find him in some corner of the property, completely absorbed in dismantling someone's pocket watch or studying the inner workings of a piece of farm equipment. Most fathers of that era would have dealt with such behavior harshly. Discipline was swift and uncompromising in rural households where every family member's contribution was essential for survival. But Henry's mother, Mary Ford, saw something special in her eldest son. She recognized his mechanical curiosity as genuine talent rather than mere disobedience. Against her husband's protests, she set up a workbench where Henry could pursue his interests and even bought him proper tools to work with. This maternal support proved crucial in shaping Henry's future, but it also created tension in the household. William Ford couldn't understand why his son showed such indifference toward what he considered meaningful, honest work. The farming life had lifted the Ford family out of poverty and provided them with security and respectability. To William, Henry's mechanical tinkering seemed like frivolous distraction from real responsibilities. The first hint of Henry's future genius appeared when he turned 12. His father, perhaps hoping to encourage more practical interests, gifted him a pocket watch. Most children would have simply worn it or perhaps learned to read its face more accurately. Henry immediately began experimenting with its internal mechanisms. Within days, he had completely disassembled the entire watch, studied every gear, spring, and component, and successfully reassembled it into perfect working condition. Word of this achievement spread quickly through their rural community. Soon, neighbors were bringing Henry their broken timepieces, and he developed a reputation as an exceptionally skilled watch repairman. This wasn't just childhood curiosity anymore. Henry was demonstrating genuine mechanical aptitude that impressed even the adults around him. He could diagnose problems, understand complex mechanical relationships, and execute delicate repairs with steady hands and patient attention to detail. But the moment that truly changed Henry's life came when he turned 13. During a school trip to Detroit, he encountered his first steam engine. This wasn't just any piece of machinery. This was a massive, powerful device that seemed to possess almost magical capabilities. The engine could power multiple machines simultaneously, transforming raw energy into useful work with impressive efficiency. For Henry, seeing that steam engine was like witnessing the future itself. He bombarded the engine operator with questions. How did it work? Who had built it? How fast could it operate? What were its limitations? The operator, probably amused by the young boy's intense interest, patiently explained the basic principles of steam power. But Henry's questions went far beyond basic curiosity. He wanted to understand every aspect of the machine's design and operation. From that moment forward, steam engines became Henry's obsession. He read everything he could find about them, studied diagrams whenever possible, and began dreaming of building his own. This wasn't just mechanical interest anymore. It was a vision of liberation. If machines could replace human and animal labor, if they could make work more efficient and less physically demanding, then perhaps they could also provide an escape route from the farm life he found so constraining. By age 15, Henry had actually constructed his first working steam engine. It was crude and small, but it functioned according to the same principles as the massive industrial engines he'd studied. His family was amazed, but also somewhat concerned. Henry's mechanical abilities were clearly exceptional, but they seemed to be pulling him further away from the farming life they had planned for him. Then tragedy struck the Ford household. Henry's beloved mother, Mary, died suddenly from illness. The loss devastated Henry more than anyone else in the family. Mary had been his strongest supporter, his advocate when his father questioned his mechanical pursuits, and his emotional anchor in a world that often felt hostile to his dreams. With her gone, the farm held nothing but painful memories and a future that felt more like a trap than a destination. Henry's grief intensified his existing hatred for farm life. Every familiar sight and routine reminded him of his mother's absence. The land that had once seemed merely confining now felt actively oppressive. His relationship with his father, already strained by their different visions for Henry's future, became even more difficult. William Ford still expected his eldest son to eventually take over the farming operation, but Henry could no longer even pretend to share that goal. The solution came to Henry with startling clarity. He would leave. At 16, against his father's strong objections, Henry packed his few belongings and set out for Detroit. The city represented everything the farm was not: complex, dynamic, filled with machinery and opportunity. Detroit was rapidly becoming an industrial center, hungry for young men with mechanical aptitude and willing to work hard to prove themselves. Walking those 9 miles from farm to city, Henry Ford was making more than just a geographical journey. He was transforming himself from a reluctant farm boy into someone entirely new. He had no detailed plan, no guaranteed job waiting, no safety net beyond his own confidence and mechanical skills. But he had something perhaps more valuable: an unshakable belief that he was destined for something greater than the life his birth circumstances seemed to dictate. Detroit in 1879 was a city in transition. The Industrial Revolution was creating new opportunities daily, but it was also a harsh environment for newcomers. Competition for good jobs was fierce, and employers were quick to dismiss workers who couldn't immediately prove their value. Henry's lack of formal education and limited work experience made him particularly vulnerable, but his confidence and willingness to exaggerate his mechanical knowledge helped him secure positions. His first job came at the Michigan Car Company, where they manufactured streetcars. Henry approached this opportunity with characteristic enthusiasm, eager to learn everything about large-scale manufacturing and mechanical systems. But his employment lasted only 6 days before he was fired. The exact reasons remain unclear, but it was probably a combination of inexperience and perhaps some personality conflicts with supervisors who weren't impressed by a cocky farm boy claiming expertise he hadn't yet demonstrated. Unemployment in a strange city was terrifying for a 16-year-old with no family support, but Henry refused to return home defeated. Instead, he found work as an apprentice at the James Flower and Brothers machine shop. The pay was minimal, only $2.60 per week, barely enough to cover basic living expenses. But Henry saw this job as an education rather than just employment. Every day brought new exposure to different machines, manufacturing techniques, and problem-solving approaches. To make ends meet financially, Henry took a second job working nights as a watch repairman. 6 hours a night, 6 days a week, he cleaned and repaired timepieces for $3 weekly. Between his day job at the machine shop and his evening work with watches, Henry was working nearly around the clock. But he didn't see this as hardship. Every hour spent working with mechanical devices was an hour spent building the knowledge and skills that would eventually transform his life. Even with such a demanding work schedule, Henry still found time to study and experiment with machines whenever possible. He approached every new piece of equipment with the same intense curiosity that had characterized his childhood. What made it work? How could it be improved? What principles governed its operation? This constant learning mindset would prove crucial to his later success, but at the time, it was simply the way his mind naturally approached the world. After 3 years in Detroit, Henry made a surprising decision. He returned to his family's farm in Michigan. This wasn't a surrender to his father's expectations, though. Henry's motivations were entirely practical. He still disliked farming, but he recognized that the farm offered something Detroit couldn't: the freedom to experiment with larger machines, and the time to pursue his own projects without the constraints of employment schedules. His father had recently purchased a portable steam engine, which was becoming increasingly common among progressive farmers. These engines could power threshing machines, sawmills, and other equipment, making farm work more efficient and less labor-intensive. For Henry, this steam engine represented the perfect opportunity to deepen his understanding of power generation and mechanical systems. Henry became so skilled with the steam engine that word of his abilities spread throughout the region. Neighbors began hiring him to operate their steam-powered equipment, paying him $3 per operation. This was Henry's first taste of entrepreneurship, earning money by applying specialized knowledge rather than just trading his time for wages. The experience taught him valuable lessons about the relationship between expertise, reputation, and financial opportunity. His growing reputation eventually reached representatives of the Westinghouse Engine Company of Schenectady, New York. They offered Henry a position traveling throughout southern Michigan, setting up and servicing Westinghouse steam tractor engines. This job combined everything Henry loved: working with advanced machinery, solving complex problems, traveling to different locations, and building his professional reputation in the mechanical field. But Henry's personal life was also evolving during this period. At a New Year's Eve party in 1885, he met Clara Jane Bryant. Clara was everything Henry needed in a partner: intelligent, patient, supportive of his ambitions, and willing to tolerate the unconventional lifestyle that his mechanical obsessions demanded. They became engaged the following year, and Henry's father gave them 40 acres of land as a wedding gift. Most couples would have used that land to establish a traditional farming operation, but Henry had different ideas entirely. Instead of crops and livestock, he saw the land as space for workshops and experimental facilities. Clara understood and supported this vision, recognizing that Henry's happiness and success lay in mechanical innovation rather than agricultural tradition. In 1891, Henry and Clara moved to Detroit, where Henry's career took its next crucial turn. He had learned about internal combustion engines through a British magazine, discovering that a German engineer named Nicholas Otto was producing small quantities of engines that operate on entirely different principles than steam power. These gas engines didn't require 30 minutes of startup time because they performed all necessary combustion internally, making them faster and more efficient than steam alternatives. Although gas engines were becoming popular in Europe, few Americans had heard of them. Henry managed to locate someone in Detroit who owned one, and his first encounter with gas engine technology was revelatory. Here was a power source that combined the efficiency he admired in steam engines with the convenience and responsiveness he craved. But understanding how gas engines worked, particularly their reliance on electric spark ignition, required knowledge Henry didn't yet possess. To learn about electricity, Henry applied for a position with the Edison Illuminating Company as a night engineer. The company was Detroit's largest electric utility, generating power for over 1,000 homes using steam engines. Henry's steam engine experience made him perfectly qualified for the job, which paid $40 monthly and primarily involved maintaining the power generation equipment. The position proved ideal for Henry's learning objectives. When the engines were running smoothly, he had considerable free time to study electrical systems and experiment with different applications. This combination of steady income, relevant work experience, and educational opportunity created perfect conditions for Henry's next breakthrough. In 1893, Henry and Clara welcomed their first and only child, Edsel Bryant Ford. Just 3 months later, Henry was promoted to chief engineer with a salary increase to $100 per week. That same year, he succeeded in creating his first working gas engine, representing a crucial step toward his dream of building a horseless carriage. The culmination of years of experimentation came on June 4th, 1896, at exactly 1:30 in the morning. Henry had finally completed his first automobile, which he called the quadricycle. The vehicle was essentially 2 bicycles placed side by side, powered by a gasoline engine that Henry had designed and built himself. While primitive by later standards, the quadricycle represented a functioning proof of concept for personal motorized transportation. The first test drive revealed both the promise and the limitations of Henry's design. The quadricycle had 2 gears, but neither was for reverse, making maneuvering difficult. More seriously, it lacked any cooling system, causing the engine to overheat after extended operation. But despite these flaws, The vehicle successfully demonstrated that individual motorized transportation was not only possible, but practical. Henry made multiple improvements to the quadricycle, most notably adding a cooling system that solved the overheating problem. When he felt confident in the design, he sold the vehicle for $200 and used that money to begin work on a larger, more sophisticated automobile. With support from Detroit's mayor, Henry completed his second experimental car by July 1899. The new vehicle was substantially larger, sturdier, and heavier than the quadricycle. When Henry took wealthy lumber merchant William Murphy for a test drive, Murphy was so impressed that he immediately wanted to become involved in Henry's business. They shook hands that day, and on August 5, 1899, the Detroit Automobile Company was officially established. Unfortunately, the company failed within a year due to several fundamental problems. Henry's perfectionist approach to vehicle design conflicted with his investors' desire to produce cars quickly for immediate sale. Additionally, the company's dependence on part suppliers created production bottlenecks whenever deliveries were delayed. Henry's first car, called the delivery wagon, took 6 months to manufacture, and only 20 vehicles were completed during the company's entire 2-year existence. Henry was eventually fired from his own company, but rather than feeling defeated, he was actually relieved. The pressure to compromise his design standards had been frustrating, and now he had the freedom to pursue his automotive vision without investor interference. As he later said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Rather than immediately starting another passenger car company, Henry decided to focus on racing vehicles. Racing had become extremely popular in America, and successful racing cars provided excellent platforms for showcasing automotive technology and quality. Additionally, after the Detroit Automobile Company failure, Henry needed to rebuild his reputation before investors would trust him with another venture. Henry's strategy proved successful. His newly designed racing car defeated vehicles built by Cleveland automaker Alexander Winton and other leading national racing drivers at Grosse Pointe. The 26-horsepower vehicle became the talk of Detroit's automotive community, giving investors the confidence they needed to support Henry's next venture. The result was the Ford Motor Company, with Henry serving as chief engineer. But his position remained precarious because Henry continued focusing on racing cars, which frustrated investors who wanted him to develop passenger vehicles for mass market sales. They brought in Henry Martin Leland to oversee passenger car development, effectively reducing Henry's influence over his own company. Unwilling to work under someone else's direction, Henry left the company. In his autobiography, he explained, "I resigned, determined never again to put myself under orders." Ironically, Henry Leland followed the investors' wishes and created what would become the Cadillac brand. When Henry Ford left, the company name was changed from Ford Motor Company to Cadillac Motor Company. Henry partnered with former racing cyclist Tom Cooper to continue building racing cars. In 1902, they produced the Ford 999, an 80-horsepower vehicle driven by Barney Oldfield, a former bicycle racer who had never driven an automobile before. The car surpassed Winton's vehicles again, and by 1904, Henry's new racing car broke all American speed records by reaching 91.4 miles per hour. These victories established Henry as America's premier racing car designer, creating the reputation he needed to attract investors for his third automotive company. With support from 11 investors, especially coal dealer Alexander Young Malcolmson, Henry's new venture came to life. Initially called Ford and Malcolmson Limited, it was later renamed the Ford Motor Company. Determined not to fail again, Henry focused on creating vehicles affordable for common people, rather than luxury items for the wealthy. He announced to his associates and investors, "I will build a motor car for the great multitude constructed of the best materials, by the best men to be hired after the simplest designs that modern engineering can devise, so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one." Henry demonstrated exceptional talent for identifying and attracting skilled workers who shared his vision. He created over 20 different car designs before developing one that satisfied his standards, which he called the Model A. For the next 5 years, Henry continuously improved the Model A, which was eventually followed by the Model N. During this period, the most significant changes weren't in vehicle design, but in manufacturing processes. One crucial lesson from Henry's failed businesses was the importance of controlling parts supply rather than depending on multiple outside manufacturers. He found a machine shop in Detroit to supply most components needed for car assembly, dramatically improving production reliability and speed. The breakthrough moment came during a trip to Chicago, where Henry witnessed assembly line operations at a slaughterhouse. He immediately recognized how the same principles could revolutionize automobile manufacturing. Instead of building one complete car at a time, workers could specialize in specific assembly tasks, while the vehicle moved along a production line. In 1904, Henry raised additional capital and built his own factory, employing over 300 workers and experimenting with assembly line techniques. The Model N, introduced in 1906, was the first Ford vehicle to utilize assembly line production. even though the system was still being refined. The assembly line increased production levels 5 times over previous methods, making the Model N America's best-selling car. Henry's ambitions extended beyond just assembly processes, though. In 1905, he built his own manufacturing facility to produce engines, transmissions, and other crucial components. This vertical integration strategy gave him much greater control over quality, costs, and production schedules. Around this time, Henry also discovered vanadium steel, a material approximately 3 times stronger than conventional steel while being significantly lighter. This discovery enabled the development of vehicles that were both more durable and more efficient than anything previously available. Vanadium steel became a crucial component in Henry's most successful creation, the Model T. The Model T represented the culmination of everything Henry had learned about automotive design, manufacturing efficiency, and market positioning. When first released, it was actually one of the most expensive cars Henry had ever produced, priced at $850, equivalent to approximately $21,000 in today's currency. But despite its high price, the Model T quickly became a phenomenon in America. Within days of its release, 15,000 orders were placed, and the Ford Motor Company became America's leading car manufacturer. Henry realized he needed a much larger factory to meet demand, so in 1910 he built a new plant in Highland Park, Michigan. After several years of experimentation, the assembly line system was officially perfected by 1913. The new assembly line process was revolutionary in its efficiency. Instead of workers moving around vehicles during assembly, the vehicles were pulled down production lines while workers remained at fixed stations, each performing specialized tasks. This system reduced production time from 12 hours per vehicle to just 90 minutes. By 1914, Ford's production rate exceeded 300,000 vehicles annually, which was more than all other car manufacturers combined. Between 1910 and 1916, Model T production increased from 20,000 to nearly 1 million units. By then, approximately half of all automobiles on Earth were Fords. Henry implemented another brilliant strategy that distinguished him from competitors. As production volumes increased each year, he reduced the Model T's selling price. By 1916, the car that had originally sold for $850 was available for less than $400. This approach made automobiles accessible to middle-class Americans for the first time in history. But Henry's most revolutionary innovation wasn't mechanical, it was social. Many assembly line workers found the repetitive nature of their jobs boring and degrading. Skilled craftsmen felt insulted by being assigned simple, repetitive tasks instead of building complete automobiles. As a result, worker turnover was becoming a serious problem as employees left Ford to work for other companies. Henry's solution was audacious. He doubled workers' wages, raising them to $5 daily. Many competing companies predicted this decision would bankrupt Ford, but it had exactly the opposite effect. Skilled mechanics from across the country flocked to Detroit seeking higher wages, giving Ford access to America's best automotive talent. Henry also reduced the standard workday, allowing the factory to operate 3 shifts and maintain 24-hour production. As he explained, "We believe in making 25,000 men prosperous and contented rather than following the plan of making a few slave drivers in our multimillionaire establishments." This wage policy forced other automotive companies to increase their own compensation packages to prevent losing workers to Ford. Henry had fundamentally changed American manufacturing and labor relations. His philosophy was simple. There's one rule for the industrialist, and that is make the best quality goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the highest wages possible. In 1919, Henry grew tired of interference from other investors and decided to buy out their stakes in the company. This transaction created several millionaires in Detroit while making Henry the sole owner of the world's largest automobile company. He appointed his 26-year-old son Edsel as company president, though Henry continued making all major decisions. However, absolute control came with significant costs. Henry became increasingly convinced that the Model T was perfect and refused to consider developing new models, even as competitors introduced more stylish and comfortable vehicles like Chevrolet. His stubborn refusal to listen to other Ford executives, including his own son, about the need for product updates eventually hurt the company's market position. By the late 1920s, declining sales figures finally forced Henry to acknowledge that the Model T era was ending. He shut down the Model T assembly line and began designing an entirely new vehicle. The Model A was released in 1927, but production had moved to a massive new facility along the Rouge River in Michigan. Henry's new factory was designed to include every step of the manufacturing process, from refining raw materials to final automobile assembly. It became the world's largest factory, producing steel, glass, tires, and other components internally. However, Henry's one-man control over decision-making was no longer an effective management approach for such a complex operation. By 1936, Ford Motor Company had fallen to 3rd place in the American market, behind General Motors and Chrysler Corporation. Even Henry's innovative V8 engine design couldn't reverse the company's declining market share. The Great Depression made conditions worse, forcing Henry to lay off workers and reduce wages. In 1943, Henry's son Edsel died of stomach cancer. Henry continued running the company for 2 more years before finally transferring control to his grandson, Henry Ford II. Henry retired to his estate and died of cerebral hemorrhage on April 7, 1947. Today, Ford Motor Company maintains a market capitalization of approximately $70 billion and remains one of the world's largest automotive manufacturers. But Henry Ford's legacy extends far beyond just the company that bears his name. He fundamentally transformed American manufacturing, labor relations, and social mobility. He didn't just put America on wheels, he created the economic conditions that built the modern middle class. From that 16-year-old farm boy walking down a dirt road to Detroit, to the industrial titan who revolutionized manufacturing and transportation, Henry Ford's story demonstrates the incredible power of vision, persistence, and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. He proved that sometimes the biggest changes come not from those born to privilege, but from those hungry enough to imagine and create entirely new possibilities. Henry Ford once said, "Life is a series of experiences, each one of which makes us bigger, even though sometimes it is hard to realize this. For the world was built to develop character, and we must learn that the setbacks and grieves which we endure help us in our marching onward." That philosophy, forged in the hard experience of a farm boy who refused to accept the limitations others placed on him, ultimately changed the world. This is just one piece of the bigger picture. Subscribe if you want to understand the full context and how to better protect yourself in uncertain times. And the video on screen takes this story one step further.